Beneath a canopy of stars that whispered secrets only the Forsaken could hear, the blind Omega stumbled into the frozen embrace of the northern wilds. Alara's world had always been one of shadows and echoes, but the rejection carved a deeper darkness into her soul. Born without sight in the rigid hierarchy of the Silverfang pack, she had learned to navigate by the pull of the earth, the scent of pine and frost, and the subtle vibrations of the wind. Her blindness was no curse in the eyes of the goddess. It was a gift, they said, a veil that sharpened other senses. Yet, to her Alpha, Thorn, it had become an excuse, a flaw too glaring under the full moon's judgmental gaze. "You see nothing," he had snarled during the mating ceremony, his voice a blade slicing through the gathered pack. "How can you stand beside a king who must lead with eyes wide open?" The words echoed now in her mind as she fled, banished not by decree, but by the indifference of those who turned away. The snow fell in relentless sheets, blanketing the jagged peaks of the Frostspire Mountains. Each step crunched like brittle bones under her threadbare boots, the cold seeping through her tattered cloak, a remnant of the fine wool she once wore as the pack's cherished seer. Alara's hands, calloused from years of tracing runes in the dirt, clutched at the air for guidance. The wind howled like distant wolves, carrying the metallic tang of blood from some unseen hunt. She was alone, truly alone, for the first time since her birth. The pack had left her at the edge of their territory, a mercy killing unspoken, expecting the wilds to claim what their alpha could not stomach. Her fingers brushed against the symbol that had marked her since childhood, a pendant of starlight forged silver, cool and unyielding against her chest. It was no ordinary trinket, a shard of meteorite etched with lunar phases by the pack's elders. They called it the Star Whisper, said it hummed with the goddess's voice for those pure enough to listen. Alara had always felt its pulse, a faint rhythm syncing with her heartbeat, but tonight it burned, as if the stars themselves wept for her exile. She pressed it to her lips, tasting the faint salt of her own tears mingling with the frost. The path downward was treacherous, a descent into the shadowed valleys where the trees clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. Alara's breath came in ragged clouds, her body aching from the weight of betrayal. Why her? She had foreseen minor omens for the pack, storms averted, hunts blessed, but never the grand prophecies that alphas coveted. Thorn's ambition had twisted her gift into a liability. A blind Omega could not dazzle rivals with visions of glory. In the ceremony's firelit circle, under the moon's pale watch, he had renounced her publicly, his pheromones flooding the air with rejection's bitter sting. The pack's howls of approval still rang in her ears, a chorus of abandonment. She collapsed against a boulder, the stone's chill leaching into her bones. The wind shifted, carrying a new scent, smoke, sharp and acrid, laced with the coppery warmth of fresh blood. Alara's heightened senses flared, footsteps, heavy and uneven, crunching through the snow not far off. Her heart pounded, a drumbeat of fear and instinct. Predators roamed these heights, rogue betas, feral shifters, or worse, the shadow packs that preyed on the weak. She curled tighter, willing herself invisible, but the pendant warmed again, its vibration urging her forward like a silent command. A low growl rumbled through the night, closer now, vibrating the ground beneath her. Alara froze, her blind eyes staring into nothingness, every nerve attuned to the intruder's approach. The air thickened with alpha presence, dominant, wounded, laced with the musk of guilt and fury. He was no ordinary wanderer. His aura pressed against her like a storm front, raw power tempered by something broken. She heard the hitch in his breath, the drag of a limp, the faint drip of blood hitting snow. Who trespasses in these forsaken peaks? His voice was a gravelly thunder, edged with pain, yet carrying the weight of command that no exile could fully shed. Alara's lips parted, but fear sealed them. She was an Omega, marked for survival through submission, yet rejection had stripped even that role from her. The pendant thrummed hotter, a star's insistent pulse, as if the moon itself conspired to draw them together. She sensed his approach, the heat of his body cutting through the cold like a blade. His scent enveloped her, earth and iron, smoke from a dying fire, and beneath it, the sorrow of a king dethroned by his own hand. He stopped mere feet away, his breathing labored. "Speak, shadow, or are you another ghost sent by the goddess to haunt me?" Alara's hand instinctively touched the star whisper, its silver surface now feverish against her skin. In that moment, amid the swirling snow and the moon's ethereal glow filtering through the clouds, she felt the first stirrings of something ancient, a connection forged not in light, but in the darkness they both carried. The wind howled louder, as if the mountains themselves held their breath, waiting for the blind one to unveil what the stars had long concealed. But doubt clawed at her core. Was this salvation or snare? The goddess's prophecies were written in starlight, they said, visible only to those unburdened by sight. Alara had glimpsed fragments in her dreams, visions of a fallen king, a redemption bathed in lunar fire. Yet to trust now, in her exile's fragility, felt like surrendering the last shred of her freedom. The Alpha's presence loomed, a silhouette in her mind's eye, his guilt a mirror to her pain. As the snow buried her tracks, she wondered, could the moon truly want this? A union born of wounds too deep to heal alone? The pendant pulsed once more, a beacon in the night, pulling her toward the unknown. And in the silence that followed, Alara made her first choice, to rise, to face the shadow that might yet become her light. Alara's breath caught in her throat, a fragile thread against the wind's relentless dirge. The Alpha's voice lingered in the air like smoke from a smothered flame, heavy with the authority of one who had commanded legions under the moon's unblinking eye. She rose slowly, her bare fingers sinking into the snow for balance, the cold biting like 1,000 tiny teeth. The star whisper pendant thrummed against her chest, its silver warmth a counterpoint to the frost that clawed at her skin. It urged her forward, a silent prophecy uncoiling in her veins, but fear rooted her in place. Fear of the stranger's power, of the rejection that still echoed in her bones like a fresh wound. I am no ghost," she whispered finally, her voice a fragile wisp carried on the gale. It trembled, not from the chill alone, but from the instinctive pull of his presence. Omegas were woven for such bonds, threads of fate drawing them to alphas like moths to lunar fire. Yet this felt different, sharper, laced with the tang of blood and regret that mirrored her own exile. She tilted her head, listening to the rhythm of his labored breaths, the subtle shift of weight as he favored his injured leg. The scent of him intensified, rich earth churned by battle. The sharp bite of iron from a gash that wept crimson into the snow, and beneath it all a melancholy musk, like ancient forests mourning lost kings. He moved closer, his boots crunching with deliberate caution, as if testing the ground for traps laid by the goddess herself. Alara could sense the outline of him in her mind's shadowed canvas. Broad-shouldered, cloaked in furs matted with frost and darker stains, his aura a storm held in check by sheer will. "Then what are you, little shadow?" he murmured, his tone softening just enough to betray curiosity amid the gravel of pain. A wanderer? A spy from the Silverfang borders? There was no immediate threat in his words, only the wariness of one hunted. His pheromones flickering like torchlight, dominant, yet frayed at the edges, as if guilt had worn him thin. She shook her head, the motion sending loose strands of her raven hair whipping across her face, catching flecks of ice. "Exiled," she said simply, the word tasting of ash on her tongue. "Cast out by my own, the pack. They deemed me unworthy." Her hand hovered near the pendant. its pulse syncing with the distant howl of wind through the pines, a chorus that seemed to mourn their shared solitude. Why reveal this to a stranger? Instinct warred with reason. Her body yearned to submit, to lean into the shelter of his strength. But her mind recoiled, remembering Thorn's sneer, the pack's indifferent howls under the moon's cold judgment. A low chuckle escaped him, bitter as blood on snow, followed by a wince as he shifted. She heard the rustle of fabric tearing, the wet sound of him binding a wound with strips from his cloak. Unworthy, he echoed, the word laced with self-mockery, a word that binds tighter than any chain. I am King Alaric of the Frostvale realm, or what remains of it. Fallen. They call me now, cursed by my own blade for a mercy I could not grant. His voice cracked on the last, revealing the fracture beneath the crown he no longer wore. Guilt radiated from him like heat from a dying ember, drawing her in despite herself. He had killed. She sensed it in the metallic reek that clung to him. Not in rage, but in duty's cruel demand. A betrayal that haunted his every step. Alara's curiosity stirred, a spark in the void of her blindness. She stepped nearer, guided by the pendant's insistent hum, her senses painting him in vivid strokes. The warmth of his body cutting through the night's bite, the faint crackle of frost on his armor, the steady thump of his heart beneath the turmoil. "What mercy?" she asked, her voice steadier now, emboldened by the shared shadow of their pains. The wind howled louder, whipping snow into a veil that blurred the world, but in that chaos their scents mingled, her subtle wildflower essence against his stormy iron, forging an invisible thread. Alaric hesitated, his breath hitching as if the words were thorns in his throat. "My brother," he confessed at last, the admission raw, like flesh torn open. He turned traitor, allying with Shadowpacks to seize the throne. I struck him down under the blood moon, but not before he cursed me with his dying breath, a wound that festers not in body alone, but in soul. The goddess demands balance, they say, but what king can rule with hands stained so? He paused, and she felt his gaze upon her, intense even in her sightless world, probing the darkness she carried as he did his own. The connection ignited then, instinctive and unwelcome, a pull deep in her core, where Omega instincts whispered of mates and redemption. Yet she denied it, rationalizing it as survival's trick, the curiosity of two exiles drawn by the moon's capricious light. Fear coiled tighter. To yield now would mean vulnerability, a surrender to a power that could shatter her anew. But the star whisper burned hotter, its silver etching visions in her mind, starlight weaving prophecies, a blind seer unveiling truths hidden from sighted eyes. Was he the fallen king of her dreams, the one whose wound she alone could read? Alaric extended a hand, gloved and bloodied, hovering in the space between them. "The night grows fangs," he said, voice low with unspoken plea. "Will you stand as enemy or share the storm?" Alara's fingers trembled, inches from his, the air electric with possibility and peril. The snow swirled like prophetic veils, the distant uives of wolves echoing their dilemma, trust or flee into the abyss. In that frozen instant, as the moon pierced the clouds with silver lances, Alara felt the first true stir of destiny's hand, binding their broken paths in starlit thread. But denial lingered, a shield against the heart's treacherous song. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The storm's fury built like a beast unchained, whipping snow into blinding veils that clawed at their exposed skin. Ilara's hand hovered in the frigid air, inches from Alaric's outstretched glove, the heat of his palm a distant promise against the encroaching night, Her instinct screamed retreat, Omega frailty against Alpha might, exile against King. But the Star Whisper pendant seared her chest, its silver pulse a rhythmic command, syncing with the thunder of her heart and the distant rumble of approaching peril. She withdrew, not in refusal, but in the sharp clarity of survival's edge. "Not yet," she murmured, her voice threading through the gale like a fragile incantation. "The wind carries more than cold. They come." Alaric's aura sharpened, his body coiling like a predator, sensing the hunt's turn. He withdrew his hand, the leather creaking as he gripped the hilt of a sword hidden beneath his cloak, its blade etched with runes that hummed faintly in the charged air. "Shadow packs," he growled, the words laced with the bitter certainty of one who had danced this deadly waltz before. Ilara scented it too, the acrid reek of feral musk, undercut by the foul tang of rot and unchecked rage closing in from the eastern ridge. Not wolves of the wild, but twisted shifters, outcasts warped by the goddess's curse, drawn to the vulnerable like moths to a guttering flame. They howled now, a discordant chorus that mocked the moon's serene vigil, their paws churning the snow into bloody slush. "Run!" Alaric urged, his voice a low thunder, but Ilara shook her head, her blind world alive with the vibrations of their advance, 6, no 7, flanking from the shadowed pines. The pendant's warmth spread through her limbs, sharpening her senses to a razor's keenness. She felt the earth's subtle tremors, the shift of weight in the drifts, the ragged breaths of beasts driven by hunger and ancient grudge. "We stand together, or we fall divided," she said, surprising herself with the steel in her tone. Rejection had forged her not into fragility, but into something unyielding, a seer who read the unseen currents of fate. He hesitated, his guilt a palpable shadow, but necessity bound them in that instant. Alaric seized her wrist, gentle yet firm, his touch igniting sparks along her skin, a forbidden warmth that stirred the Omega core she had long suppressed. "Stay close," he commanded, pulling her toward a jagged outcrop where the mountain's flank offered meager shelter, a crevice half-veiled by ice-slick boulders. They moved as one, his limp slowing them to a desperate rhythm, her guidance instinctive. "Left, deeper snow," she whispered, her free hand trailing the stone's frozen veins, mapping the path her eyes could not see. The howls grew nearer, laced with savage glee, the air thickening with their predatory intent. They ducked into the crevice, the narrow gap swallowing them like the goddess's maw. Alaric pressed her against the rough wall, his body a shield of muscle and fur, his breath hot against her ear amid the claustrophobic dark. "They hunt the wounded," he murmured, his free hand drawing the sword with a whisper of steel on leather. Its edge caught the faint moonlight filtering through the snow-choked entrance, gleaming like starlight on frost. Ilara's heart hammered, not just from fear, but from the intimacy of his proximity, the musk of his sweat mingling with blood, the steady thrum of his pulse echoing her own. Empathy bloomed unbidden, a fragile vine in barren soil. She sensed the weight of his curse, the brother's betrayal that mirrored her pack's abandonment, two souls adrift in the same lunar tide. The first shadow pack beast lunged, a hulking form of matted fur and yellowed fangs, its claws scraping stone as it clawed at the crevice's mouth. Alaric struck true, his blade slicing through sinew with a wet crunch, hot blood spraying across the snow in crimson arcs that steamed in the cold. The creature's yelp pierced the night, a guttural cry that summoned its kin. Ilara's world exploded into chaos, snarls reverberating off the walls, the metallic spray of ichor, the king's grunts of exertion as he parried and thrust. She pressed closer, her hands finding purchase on his back, not in cowering, but in anchoring him. The pendant guided her, visions flickering in her mind's void, the beast's twisted loyalties, bound by a rival alpha's dark pact. Drawn to Alaric's scent of fallen royalty. One broke through, its fetid breath washing over her, jaws snapping inches from her throat. Alara reacted without thought, her voice rising in a seer's incantation, words pulled from the Star Whisper's pulse. By the moon's veiled eye, retreat to Shadow's keep. The beast recoiled, whining as if burned, its form shuddering under an unseen force. Alaric finished it with a savage twist, his sword burying deep, but in the fray, a claw raked his side, reopening his wound. He staggered, blood soaking through his cloak, warm and sticky against her arm where she steadied him. The pack faltered then, their howls fracturing into retreat, driven back by the combined fury of blade and prophecy. Silence fell, broken only by their ragged breaths and the wind's mournful sigh. Alaric slumped against the wall, pulling her down with him into the snow-dusted hollow, their bodies entwined in exhaustion's embrace. The bond deepened in that shared refuge, empathy weaving through the pain like silver threads. His guilt confessed in halting whispers of fraternal blood. Her exile laid bare in tales of sightless visions, scorned. "You fought as kin," he said softly, his fingers brushing the pendant at her throat, tracing its etched phases with reverent awe. The touch lingered, electric, stirring a tenderness born of mutual scars, yet resisted still. Love was no swift balm, but a slow forging in fire and frost. Ilara leaned into him, the warmth of his frame chasing the chill, her head resting against his chest where his heart beat a steady dirge. The Star Whisper cooled now, its pulse a lullaby of fragile peace, but doubt lingered like the blood's coppery scent. Could this shelter endure the dawn's revelations, or would their wounds tear them asunder anew? Outside, the moon watched, her light gilding the slain beasts in ethereal silver, a testament to the night's mercy. Two exiles, bound not by fate's decree, but by the choice to shield one another from the abyss. In the crevice's hush, as snow sealed their sanctuary, Alara felt the first true thaw in her frozen soul, a bond that whispered of redemption's distant flame. Yet the wind carried echoes of greater storms, the rival's shadow lengthening, demanding they rise or perish entwined. The crevice's chill lingered like a lover's reluctant farewell, seeping into Alara's bones as dawn's faint promise clawed at the horizon. She stirred against Alaric's side, the rhythm of his breathing a steady anchor in the dim hollow where they had taken refuge. Blood crusted the stone around them, a stark reminder of the night's frenzy. The slain shadow beasts sprawled like broken idols at the entrance, their fur matted with frost and ichor that gleamed under the moon's waning silver. The Star Whisper pendant rested heavy against her chest, its warmth now a subdued ember, as if sated by the survival they had clawed from the jaws of fate. Yet in the quiet aftermath, doubt stirred anew, a whisper in her blood. Was this bond a fleeting warmth, or the forge of something eternal? Alaric shifted, his hand brushing hers in the confined space, the touch sending a shiver through her that had little to do with the cold. His wound had stopped bleeding, bound roughly with strips of his cloak, but the scent of it clung to him, coppery and vital, mingling with the earthy musk of his skin. "The storm breaks," he murmured, his voice roughened by exhaustion and the night's confessions. Ilara nodded, her senses attuned to the subtle shift, the wind's howl softening to a sigh, the snow's relentless fall easing into scattered flakes that danced like ethereal spirits. She rose first, guided by the earth's faint vibrations, her fingers tracing the crevice's jagged walls until she emerged into the pale light. The world beyond was a canvas of devastation and fragile beauty. Pines bowed under snow's weight, their branches etched in silver, and the valley below shrouded in mist that carried the faint, acrid bite of distant smoke. Alaric followed, his limp more pronounced now, each step a testament to the toll of kingship's ghosts. They moved in tandem, unspoken alliance binding them as they descended the slope, the pendant's pulse a quiet guide leading her through the unseen terrain. Empathy had woven its threads in the refuge's intimacy. His tales of fraternal betrayal echoed her own rejection, two wounds bleeding into one shared scar. Yet tenderness resisted full bloom, rationalized as necessity's illusion. Love, after all, was no swift dawn, but a hard-won light piercing endless night. As they crested a ridge, the air thickened with an unnatural hush, broken only by the distant uive of a lone wolf, mournful and prophetic. Alara halted, her breath catching as the star whisper ignited, a fierce burn that spread through her veins like liquid starlight. Visions assailed her then, not the fragmented dreams of before, but a torrent unleashed, starlit prophecies unfurling in her mind's void, constellations weaving tales the sighted could never grasp. She saw Alaric's fall in vivid strokes, the blood moon's crimson glow, his brother's treacherous blade glinting with shadow-packed runes, the curse's coiling darkness that festered not in flesh, but in the soul's fractured throne. And woven through it all, her own silhouette, the blind Omega, hands outstretched, reading the moon's hidden script, her touch the key to unravel his chains. She gasped, knees buckling as the revelation crashed over her like a glacial wave. The pendant thrummed wildly, its silver surface heating until it scorched her skin, etching lunar phases into her palm like a brand of destiny. Alaric caught her, his arms encircling her waist with instinctive protectiveness, pulling her against the solid wall of his chest. "Ilara!" he breathed, alarm sharpening his tone, his fingers tilting her chin upward as if to pierce her sightless gaze. The warmth of him grounded her, his heartbeat a counterpoint to the chaos in her blood, but the visions persisted. A temple of ice under the full moon, where she would stand as pathfinder, unveiling the goddess's will. Redemption not through war's fire, but mercy's quiet flame. The moon wanted this union, she realized, not as reward, but as proof. A king's guilt healed by an Omega's unseen light. "What haunts you?" Alaric demanded, his voice laced with the raw edge of fear, not for himself, but for the fragility he now cradled. Alara's hands found his face, tracing the hard lines of his jaw, the faint scar that bisected his brow, a mark from battles long past, now dwarfed by the curse's invisible torment. Her touch ignited him. She felt it in the hitch of his breath, the flare of his pheromones, dominant yet yielding in this moment of vulnerability. "The stars," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of truth. "They speak through me. Your brother's curse. It's no mere wound, Alaric. It's a veil over your sight, blinding you to the throne's true path. The goddess hid it in starlight, readable only by one who sees without eyes." He stilled, his aura crackling like storm-torn skies, guilt and awe warring in the press of his body against hers. The realization dawned slowly, pieced from her words and the pendant's insistent glow, which now bathed them both in ethereal silver, casting long shadows across the snow. Alara was no mere exile. She was the key, the blind seer whose gift unraveled the prophecies that had eluded his court's sages. Visions flooded him through her proximity, the rival Alpha's shadow lengthening from the east, plotting to exploit the curse, the pack's fractures widening under betrayal's echo. But at the center, her, Omega light piercing his darkness, offering not dominion, but redemption's arduous climb. Alaric's hand covered the star whisper, his thumb stroking its heated surface, the contact sending jolts of connection through them both. A bond no longer denied, but acknowledged in the moon's watchful gaze. "You are the revelation I fled," he confessed, voice thick with the melancholy of a king reborn. Tears froze on Alara's lashes, unseen but felt, as the visions receded, leaving clarity's sharp ache. Her dom had manifested, not in glory, but in the quiet terror of purpose. To heal him meant confronting her own fears, choosing vulnerability over isolation. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of pine and impending rain, as if the mountains themselves wept for the destiny now unveiled. Yet doubt lingered, a philosophical thorn. What strength lay in mercy, if it demanded surrender to a fate that could shatter them both? Alaric pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers, their breaths mingling in the crisp air, a tentative union forged in revelation's fire. The snow began to fall anew, soft veils cloaking the ridge, but the pendant's light endured, a beacon whispering of trials yet to come. In that embrace, Alara felt the moon's true want, not blind obedience, but the courage to read the stars and claim the light they promised. The path ahead twisted toward confrontation, where past sins would demand reckoning. But for now, the revelation bound them, Alpha and Omega, King and Seer, in starlit thread. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The mist clung to the valley like a shroud woven from forgotten oaths, its tendrils curling around Alara's ankles as she and Alaric descended the frost-laced path. The Star Whisper pendant hung heavy between her breasts, its silver now a cool weight, as if the revelation of dawn had tempered its fire into watchful embers. Yet the visions lingered in her blood, fragments of starlit script that painted the confrontation ahead. A gathering under the moon's sickle edge, where past shadows would rise to claw at their fragile bond. Alaric's hand rested at the small of her back, a steady pressure that grounded her against the earth's subtle quakes. But his silence spoke of the guilt that gnawed deeper with each step, the brother's curse, manifesting not as phantom pain, but as the inexorable pull toward reckoning. The wind shifted, carrying the low rumble of voices and the acrid bite of torch smoke, laced with the metallic tang of steel and simmering rage. Alara's senses sharpened, the air thickening with the scents of her former pack. Pine resin from Silverfang cloaks, the earthy musk of betas gathering like storm clouds, and beneath it, Thorn's dominant pheromones, sharp as shattered ice, laced with ambition's venom. They had come, not by chance, but by the rival Alpha's summons, drawn to the Frostvale borders where prophecies and betrayals converged. Her exile had been no quiet banishment. Word of the blind seer's flight had twisted into whispers of treason, fueling Thorn's bid to claim greater power through alliance with the Shadow Lords who haunted Alaric's throne. Alaric tensed beside her, his breath a controlled hiss. "They block the pass," he murmured, his voice gravel over stone, the limp in his stride belying the coiled strength of a king facing his ghosts. Alara nodded, her blind world alive with the vibrations of their approach, dozens of footfalls crunching snow, the creak of drawn boughs, the faint growl of wolves held in check by leashes of loyalty. The pendant pulsed once, a warning thrum that synced with her heartbeat, urging her to stand firm. Fear coiled in her gut, not for the blades or fangs, but for the moral precipice. To invoke her gift for Alaric meant confronting Thorn's rejection anew, choosing the fallen king's redemption over the freedom of solitude, forgiveness over the war her visions foretold. They crested the final rise, emerging onto a plateau ringed by jagged spires that pierced the twilight sky like accusing fingers. Torches flared to life, their flames dancing shadows across the snow, casting the assembly in flickering gold and crimson. Alara felt the weight of eyes upon her, hostile, curious, pitying, as the pack formed a semicircle, their howls rising in a cacophony that mocked the moon's ascent. At the center stood Thorn, his silhouette broad and unyielding in her mind-shadowed canvas, flanked by the rival Alpha, a hulking figure whose aura reeked of shadow-packed corruption. Fermented blood and withered vines, the stench of one who bartered souls for thrones. "Traitor's whore and fallen cur," Thorn snarled, his voice booming like thunder over the peaks, laced with the pheromones of unchallenged dominance. "You dare return, Alara? The goddess marked you blind for a reason, to stumble in darkness, not to consort with this cursed wretch." The words struck like barbs, reopening the wound of her renunciation, the ceremony's fire-lit humiliation, where his rejection had stripped her bare under the pack's indifferent gaze. She tasted bile, the cold wind whipping her hair like lashes, but the star whisper warmed against her skin, a defiant spark amid the chill. Alaric stepped forward, his body a barrier between her and the fray, sword half drawn with a whisper of steel. "She is no one's possession," he growled, his tone laced with the melancholy steel of one who had spilled kin's blood for duty's sake. "And I am no cur to be culled. Your alliance with the shadows reeks of desperation, Thorn. Release her, or face the goddess's true judgment." The air crackled with tension, pheromones clashing like storm fronts, Alaric's stormy iron against Thorn's glacial bite, the rival's wrath weaving through like poison fog. Alara's hand found Alaric's arm, her fingers digging into the fur of his cloak, feeling the tremor of restrained fury beneath his ethical restraint. He was no berserker. His guilt demanded mercy where war beckoned, a king's dilemma etched in every sinew. The rival Alpha laughed, a guttural rumble that echoed off the stones, his voice slithering like oil over water. "Judgment? The stars wrote your downfall, Frostvale King. Your brother's curse binds you, and this blind Omega, a pawn in prophecies I alone decipher." He gestured, and the pack shifted, boughs creaking as arrows knocked. But Alara's visions surged then, unbidden and fierce, the pendant blazing like captured moonlight, flooding her mind with the moon's hidden script. Thorn's ambition a veil for his own betrayal, the rivals packed with shadow beasts, the true fracture in the pack's ancient weave. She could expose it, shatter the alliance with words sharper than blades, but at what cost? To wield her gift meant binding herself to Alaric irrevocably, trading the illusion of freedom for love's redemptive chain, forgiveness for the pack that scorned her, or war that would drown the north in blood under the rising moon. "Speak your truth, seer," Alaric whispered urgently, his breath warm against her ear amid the growing snarls, his free hand covering hers on the pendant. The touch ignited her core, a visceral pull that warred with rational denial, Omega instinct craving his shelter, yet her soul recoiling from surrender's edge. What was strength, if not choosing mercy over vengeance? The wind howled, carrying distant ewives that mourned the choice unborn, snow swirling in veils that blurred the torch's glow into ethereal halos. Thorn advanced, his boots thudding like war drums, the pack's growls rising to a fevered pitch. Ilara stepped forward, her voice rising clear and unyielding, threaded with the star's ancient cadence. "The moon reveals what eyes betray. Thorn, your heart harbors the shadow's seed, not mine. The rival's pact twists our fates, blood for thrones, but redemption lies in release, not conquest." Gasps rippled through the assembly, the air electric with shock, as the vision's truth pierced the lies like lunar lances. Thorn faltered, his pheromones fracturing with doubt, while the rival lunged, claws extended in feral rage. Alaric met him, blade clashing in a spray of sparks and blood that warmed the snow, the fight a visceral ballet of grunts and steel under the moon's pale witness. Ilara's world narrowed to the chaos, the coppery spray of ichor, Alaric's labored breaths, the pack's fracturing howls as loyalty wavered. Her choice crystallized in the fray. Love demanded she intervene, invoking the full prophecy to heal Alaric's curse and forgive the betrayers, or flee into freedom's cold embrace, leaving war to consume them all. The pendant seared, demanding the moral leap, compassion's crown or isolation's throne. As Thorn's blade whistled past, grazing Alaric's shoulder in a hot line of crimson, Alara raised her hands, the star's light coiling from her fingertips like silver fire, poised on the precipice of destiny's verdict. In that heartbeat amid the blood and flame, the blind Omega weighed her soul's fragile scales, to bind wounds with mercy, or let the night devour the light they might yet forge. The moon hung low, her glow a silent arbiter, as the judgment unfolded in fire and frost. The silver fire coiled from Alara's fingertips like threads of captured moonlight, weaving through the frigid air with a whisper that silenced the snarls and clashes around her. The plateau trembled under the weight of her invocation, snow swirling into luminous eddies that caught the moon's sickle glow, casting the fray in ethereal halos of white and crimson. Alaric's blade locked with the rival alphas, steel singing a dirge of sparks and blood, his shoulders fresh gash weeping warm rivulets that soaked his cloak and steamed against the frost. Thorn hovered at the edge, his once unyielding form fractured by her words, pheromones souring with the rot of exposed doubt, the pack's howls fracturing into confused whimpers like wolves adrift in a storm. Ilara's heart thundered, a visceral drumbeat echoing the pendant's relentless pulse, the star whisper now a blazing core against her chest, etching its lunar phases into her very soul. The visions cascaded one final time, starlight prophecies unfurling in her mind's endless void. Alaric's curse as a coiling serpent of guilt, born from his brother's dying plea for mercy denied, twisting his path into isolation's abyss. She saw the moon's true want, not conquest's fire, but a union forged in sacrifice, the blind Omega's light piercing the king's darkness, healing not through dominion, but through the raw choice of forgiveness. To wield this power meant surrender, binding her gift to his redemption, trading the solitude of exile for love's unyielding forge, where compassion crowned the fallen and war's flames yielded to mercy's quiet dawn. The rival lunged again, his corrupted form a blur of shadow and fang, claws raking toward Alaric's throat in a spray of displaced snow. Time fractured in that instant, the world narrowing to the coppery tang of blood on the wind, the heat of Alaric's labored breaths, the distant ewives of the pack echoing her inner turmoil. What was strength if not this, choosing to heal the wounds that scarred them both, even as rejection's echo clawed at her core? Thorn's blade whistled past, nicking Alaric's arm in a hot line that drew a grunt of pain, but the king's eyes, felt more than seen in their fierce intensity, locked on hers, a silent plea woven with melancholy trust. "Ilara," he rasped, voice thick with the ethical weight of his guilt, "the choice is yours, not fate's chain, but your light." She extended her hands fully, the silver fire erupting in a radiant arc that enveloped the combatants, not as weapon, but as veil. The rival recoiled, his howl twisting into a guttural wail as the starlight seared the shadow pact from his veins, unraveling the curse's dark weave like frost under sun. Thorn staggered, dropping to his knees in the snow, the metallic reek of his ambition's defeat mingling with the clean bite of pine on the gale. The pack fell silent, their forms bowing under the moon's unveiled judgment, loyalty shifting like tides drawn to the true seer's glow. Ilara poured her essence into the light, the pendant's heat surging through her like liquid starfire, mending Alaric's soul wound in waves of visceral warmth, guilt's serpent uncoiling, replaced by the balm of accepted mercy, his brother's ghost whispering absolution in the ether. Alaric collapsed to one knee beside her, his sword clattering into the crimson-streaked snow, free hand reaching for hers amid the fading luminescence. Their fingers intertwined. The contact a spark that ignited the bond fully, no longer resisted, but embraced in the ache of Renascimento. His touch was roughened by battle's toll, yet tender, tracing the lines of her palm where the pendant's brand lingered like a lover's mark. "You saw what I could not," he murmured, his voice a gravelly hymn laced with the sorrow of a king reborn, tears freezing on his lashes to glint like diamonds under the moon. Ilara leaned into him, her body yielding to the pull that had warred within her, the Omega core blooming into wholeness. Not submission, but union, where her blindness became the lens through which his darkness found light. The wind sighed then, a mournful exhale that scattered the last veils of snow, revealing the plateau's transformation, torches guttering low, their flames reflecting in pools of melted frost, the pack's eyes wide with awe and penitence. Thorn rose unsteadily, his gaze, felt in its humbled weight, meeting hers for the first time without scorn. "Forgive," he whispered, the word a fragile bridge over the chasm of betrayal, his pheromones softening to the scent of yielding earth. Alara nodded, the choice sealing her soul's fragile scales. Mercy over vengeance, love as proof of strength, not reward. The rival fled into the shadows, his howls fading into the night, a defeated echo swallowed by the mountain's eternal vigil. In Alaric's embrace, as the moon climbed higher, bathing them in silver benediction, Alara felt the Renascimento take root, rejection's thorns yielding to redemption's bloom, her gift no longer scorned but exalted, his guilt transmuted into ethical resolve. They rose together, his arm around her waist a steadfast anchor, the star whisper cooling to a gentle hum, its phases etched eternally in their shared fate. The pack gathered closer, not as conquerors, but as witnesses to the goddess's revelation, a blind Omega and a fallen king, united in the dance of destiny versus freedom, where sacrifice birthed Cura and union's quiet fire. The northern wilds stretched before them, snow-capped peaks whispering of trials endured and horizons reborn, the wind carrying the faint, hopeful youths of wolves attuned to the moon's renewed song. In that moment, amid the blood-flecked frost and the embers of spent torches, Alara knew the star's script complete. Love as the ultimate prophecy. Read not in light, but in the courage to embrace the dark. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.